Hello, Brian and Alina. Here is your sewer scope from today's inspection. That's me in the basement, just kind of pointing things out, letting you know that I'm actually in the proper basement, your basement. There's that floor cleanout, Brian, that I pointed out earlier this morning, or this afternoon. Sorry. Cast iron, a little tight turn here, so I ultimately had to jam my arm down the pipe and kind of nudge the camera head in the right direction. Common practice from time to time. We are in cast iron, and like we were talking about earlier today, because there's a pretty substantial slope in the front of the house, we don't make a change over to clay. Whereas when this house was built, that would have been standard that you switch over, but because of that big slope, they don't use clay fittings or clay pipe, just because clay sections, vitrified clay pipe sections, are not mechanically attached together. They're just kind of pressure fitted or slipped together, and on a steep grade, they would separate pretty easily, I would say. So we are cast iron from start to finish. There's a little bit of buildup in the beginning. You can see it at the bottom of the pipe. And other stuff like that in the pipe. But overall, this initial sections are really in pretty decent shape. Not a lot of corrosion on the pipe, some buildup, maybe 10 or 15% on the bottom in places, but overall not too bad. A little bit of corrosion again, but nothing out of the ordinary. Now, as we get further along in the pipe, you start to see more, right? So more buildup. There's some right there. Anytime that you have turns or odd direction changes, there's more of a tendency for the line to grab onto stuff. So that's where you'll have some deposits built up. And in these initial stages, you'll have varying degrees of buildup. The white at the bottom, like we talked about earlier today, is most likely cooking fat, bacon grease, just basic lard type stuff that as it goes down the pipe, it cools and coagulates and it turns into that. The cast iron, because of its nature, it gets very coarse and bumpy, so one basically takes advantage of the other, meaning that cooking fat, when it congeals, it'll have a place to stick to. That's some sort of deposit or growth. I think that's easily going to get knocked out once the pipe is cleaned. So that cooking fat tends to grab onto the coarseness of the pipe. Now here we're much more scaled. You can see how bumpy the surface looks. Again, the pipe just needs to be cleaned. And then here we are, right at about 58.5 feet. We've got the city connection. Don't want to drop into that. But that's your city line right there. I'm going to pull back and keep the camera rolling, so you're more than welcome to watch the return journey. Read through my written report for some recommendations. The biggest one is just to have the pipe cleaned. Cleaned and then re-examined. Also, just because the pipe, has a certain percentage of it is covered with that muck right there. So you want to be able to take a look at the pipe again once it's clear and you've got good visibility on all the surfaces. Reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm always happy to be a resource.